Good morning. This is the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee. Today is Friday, April 3rd, and we are here. Oh, it's 11:24 in the morning, and we're here with our interns. One of our interns this morning is holding down the fort for Bob. Good morning.
Good morning. Habit Sales, the intern from UVM. I'm going to be talking about a couple bills that are in Senate Economic Development from here, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about S-173, actually rehabilitation. So starting with some Senate discussion around H-512 event ticketing, some questions from the committee that came up during testimony from a couple companies that ticketing. So from Chittenden, he asked if there was an example of a repealed price cap that caused the transition to the black market, and that was to SeatGeek, and they pointed to Massachusetts, but there was some pushback that the Massachusetts market is much different from Vermont, and some support there. Senator Chittenden was also strongly questioning the 110% price cap, and there were two folks testifying, Adam Webb and Jason Webb, who both cited around 110% to 120% being a studied price cap. And Jason Webb runs Tixel, which is a ticket company, and their business model is capping the price at around 110 to 120%, and that's worked very well for them. Senator Clarkson also asked what primary ticket sellers are doing to promote their own tickets. She asked that to Vermont venues to in competition with resellers. And the response there is that primary ticket sellers in Vermont really can't compete with the large resellers when it comes to marketing. So that is the struggle. From Senator Chittenden, he asked, what if resellers start bundling tickets with other services to justify price increases? And the response there was that's not likely to have much of an impact on the Vermont market, where high price bundles very helpful. Moving on to H-639, an act relating to data privacy, and some questions there. There was big discussion with Ancestry.com, who was testifying, especially around private right to action. Senator Clarkson questioned Ancestry on whether a tenure period would make the private right to action more acceptable to them, which of course they were against. And Ancestry said it would be a step towards reasonableness, but they would still prefer AG only enforcement. And Clarkson pushed back, knowing that Vermont already has general consumer PRA in statute. And questioning deletion, Senator Chittenden asked what happens when consumers request deletion, but federal law requires there to be retention of genetic samples. And there's going to be an exemption that they add, which says except when required by state or federal law. So they will be able to retain it in that case. And then on biometric data versus biological samples, Senator Clarkson and Chittenden asked Ancestry why biometric data shouldn't be in the bill. And Ancestry's reply was that biometric data is fundamentally different from genetic material, and regulating it would create uneven rules. They suggested making that to be separate by the CBO. And then in law enforcement access, witnesses confirmed that H-639 would not constrain any criminal justice work. And then briefly on S-173, an act relating to vocational rehabilitation. The change is for Vermont that move a separate screening process. Most states do not currently have a separate screener as an extra step to referring someone who qualifies for VR to a counselor. The basic system is that someone suffers an injury that's covered by workers' comp. The worker must be unable to return to their pre-injury job, and the employer is unable to offer alternative work. That's the basis across all states. Where states differ is the time for VR to activate automatically after continuous disability. Vermont's would be 90 days. And VR is also triggered when an injured worker reaches maximum medical improvement and still cannot return to their old job. The wage threshold may differ between states as well, with S-173 containing language that workers may request future services if their ability to earn a pre-injury wage is affected. And regarding credentials for counselors, in Vermont, a master's degree in counseling or rehab counseling is required. And this is consistent with many other states, especially those that don't require a certified rehabilitation counselor certificate. And that's what I have for this week.
Questions for Kevin?
And Vermont is one of the states that does not require the CRC, right?
Vermont is not. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks,
that's
Kevin.
helpful. Thank you.
Very helpful.
Thanks. Thanks for joining us.
Before we, yeah.
Yeah, just for the community to know that Bailey did post his report on our page, so you can get that. He was looking at the right to repair bills way around that. So there's, yes, some information on it.
Great,
We have some
thank you.
time at the end of 8:37. We'll go through that as a committee. If not, you have homework. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. We're now switching and taking a look at 8:37, which again is an act relating to rounding cash transactions. We have Shane Switzer with Linda. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm here today to talk about the cash rounding bill. My name is Shane. I own Lindenville Redemption and also a restaurant, The Pizza Man in Lindenville, Vermont. And public speaking is not my thing. I didn't bring any bourbon or pizza, but maybe next time. I'm here to, I listened to the committee discussion that you had earlier in the week.
Yeah.
And I just want to come in and talk and maybe answer some of the questions that from a business perspective. And so what we're dealing with now is back in the fall, the banks abruptly said, well, you can't get any more pennies. And retailers are like, oh, what already? We heard about it, that it was coming, but didn't know it's coming this soon. So we started scrambling. And so since then, they are releasing small amounts of pennies. We can get them here and there. So what's happening now is in Vermont, you'll notice if you go to any of the Maple Fields or the big chains, you'll go in and they're rounding in the customer's favor only right now. And what they're trying to avoid is the consumer protection laws that we're dealing with here. I think this bill addresses that. And what's important about this bill is it'll make it give us a consistent guidance to follow. As it was mentioned before, it mostly follows the Treasury's guidance on this. I did a little research on my way in, and there's a number of states that have similar bills in progress. Some of them have already passed. And the summary of those that I came up with is that they all mostly follow the Treasury's guidance here, just like this bill does. But there's a few variants. Some of the things that came up last time that I wanted to talk about is if it should be optional or not. And there's a couple of things to that, but as far as if it should be optional, I think if you are rounding, this should be this is how you do it. But I think rounding or not should be optional. And the reason why is, the thought there is if there's no pennies, everybody's gonna have to round. But in the meantime, there's the software, the POS software might not be ready to go. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute, where so if the POS software is not ready to go, most stores have POS systems these days. If it's not ready to go and they're forced around, you might be causing some confusion with the cashier and the consumers and things like that. So whether it should be optional or not, my take there would be yes, optional if you want to round or not. But if you are rounding, this should be the way that you have to round. It's my thoughts on it. In our case, at Lindenville Redemption, we're an 802 Spirit store. we have two POS systems at our store. One, if you ever went into a liquor store and bought a bottle of liquor if you come into our store and you bought a bottle of liquor and a deli sandwich, you have two transactions you have to complete there because the state, all the liquor gets run through the state POS. Everything else gets run through ours. And so, in our case, one of our POS companies, are on the store side, ready to go. They're, just tell us when you want us to switch this on. We'll start rounding, you'll be good to go. On the state side, I don't want to speak for the Department of Liquor, but they've been in touch with the AG's office. I believe they're gonna speak today, but they're saying you gotta wait until we make something happen with, not make something happen. We have to wait until there's guidance on that this is gonna be okay to think of it. And so what that means is that, this bill passes July 1st, and then the state can engage their POS vendor and go back and say, they can create the update for this. That might take a few months. And so there's 80 something 802 Spirit stores that likely have two different, guarantee they have two different ways to take money there. If one of them's ready to go and one of them's not, it creates some confusion. If it's optional or not, if we say on July 1st, you have to round, in my store, we're gonna have one rounding and one not, and it's just gonna create confusion for the cashiers and one of the questions that comes up a lot is it in somebody's favor if we're rounding or not? The research that I've done, there's been some studies, the Treasury did a study, Canada's done studies on it, they've been doing it for years, and there's another country that I don't know off the top of my head that did a study that does rounding, and one of them showed a very minute amount on the customer side, one of them showed a very minute amount on the business side, the other ones showed that it was even. So over thousands of transactions, it ends up being it evens out. Look at my notes here. It did come up, should we do all transactions? The easiest and simpler answer to that is no, because of the POS software isn't ready to handle that. So Vermont will be the only state doing that, and it would just create a nightmare with the POS vendor. So, my other ask is that please, July 1st. I know there was talk in the committee about possibly pushing it off and taking a further look at it. While I appreciate the further look at it and make sure we get it right, I would say, please make this happen sooner than later. We need consistency throughout Vermont. What we have right now is some people are rounding, some aren't. Some can still get pennies. Some may be able to get pennies for a while. And so if we get this guidance in place, then we have sooner than later, then we have the framework to say, here's what we have going forward. I would just ask this, please get that going, or please make something happen in July if at all humanly possible.
Yeah, I don't think that we were talking about studying it further.
Yeah.
I think it's just pushing the effective date off,
Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
right? So that, as you talked about, had one system that the POS system is set to go and the other one's not.
Yeah.
And so should we push the effective date out maybe until September or January 1 of 2027?
Yeah.
Or have it go into effect July 1, knowing that it's going to take time.
Yeah.
For
That
those.
makes total sense. My thought there would be, if you made it, if it was ready to go July 1st, the effective date was July 1st, and it was optional whether you round it or not, then we would be able to.
Yeah, I don't think we're saying you have to choose one or the other,
Yeah.
round or not round. I think we're saying it's not an option. This isn't guidance. If you are going to round, this is how you have to do it.
Yeah.
We're not saying, I don't think we're going to say that you either have to choose to round or choose not to round.
That makes sense. Yeah. Any other question?
Great. Thanks, Shane.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Chris?
Good morning. Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christopher Curtis. I'm an Assistant Attorney General for the state of Vermont. I'm also the Director of the Consumer Assistance Program, which is the place in state government where we receive complaints from consumers about any number of matters that might come up in their day-to-day lives, where they're seeking information, questions, expressing concerns, or making complaints, and we try to rectify those situations for consumers. So really appreciate you taking up this question of rounding in the marketplace, because I can share with you today that the Consumer Assistance Program to date has received, I don't think we've actually received any formal complaints about the question of what's happening with pennies out there in commerce and kind of consumer transactions on a day-to-day basis. We've received a couple of inquiries about what's going to happen. You know, I've heard this is happening. How might that affect me? What is the state doing about that? So your timing in taking up this legislation is important. As you've heard in prior testimony from the business community and from advocates, I think this is a question that will, it does invite scrutiny, and that you're quite right to be thinking about providing certainty to the marketplace so that consumers know they're being treated fairly. The bill contemplates disclosures, and the bill offers a path for rounding that is readily identifiable, the business community can engage in, and consumers can take part that they're getting benefit of. The question of whether or if it should be universally mandatory or whether it should be optional really is a policy determination. I mean, our office, as the Consumer Protection and Enforcement Unit, our office will enforce the laws as they are written and crafted by lawmakers. So it's really that question of just, I think, hearing from all the interested parties and then making the best Vermonters that you can. I think you just heard testimony this morning sort of suggesting that, well, you're either kind of rounding or you're not. I mean, if you have exact change and pennies and you can issue that, a business may do that until they can't. And so at some point, there's going to be a question of rounding. And what I just heard the chair identify is like, yes, and this is the roadmap for rounding if you have to engage in rounding. And so I think that helps provide some clarity. In some ways, yes, it's discretionary, but I think if there is a model to be implemented, the legislation is quite clear that the question of unfair pricing or variations that may or may not conform to what you are articulating in the bill still may be subject to inquiry and potential enforcement if someone was abusing or rounding in ways that this legislation doesn't contemplate. So I want to assure the committee, like, as I read the bill as it stands today, that protection is in place. Because it basically says if you are rounding, you're going to disclose it, and this is the way you're going to do it. So if somebody came up with an algorithm or was using AI or was using a software system that they're, you know, maybe it's a multinational corporation and they have chains all over the country, including Vermont, and they're sort of hiding the ball in their receipts or in their service delivery at the point of purchase, you know, if they were doing that in a willful way that was abusing the system, or if they were doing they weren't doing aggregation in a final price, but they were trying to do it on every single item purchase, rounding there, like all of that would still be subject to scrutiny, investigation, enforcement under the existing Consumer Protection Act, because that, you know, we may come to a conclusion that that is unfair and deceptive. Well, you are not doing what the legislature said you were supposed to do if you are rounding. So that you have, I think, correctly anticipated and built into your proposal that is still a live issue, and you're not abandoning protections or creating some kind of massive safe harbor where people can kind of indiscriminately round and not be subject to scrutiny. So it feels like you're in a place where you're sort of balancing the desire for certainty with consumer protections that have always existed in terms of pricing and fairness. I can't speculate about over time or by particular industry, whether or if there might be, in general, more instances of rounding up or rounding down. I mean, this will be a transaction by transaction process unless or until pennies are eventually phased out altogether and pricing begins to track in more round numbers or by the nickel. So I can't speculate as to how, you know, in the long term, how it balances out, or whether it's more slightly harmful to consumers or more beneficial to consumers. It may not be able to frankly ascertain that until after some period of time has gone by. But I think you are putting your finger on something important, which is there are rules of the road and there are going to be disclosures. So that is the only other point we always view in consumer protection worlds that disclosure is kind of the first and one of the most important points of consumer protection that one can have, because that's the place at which the consumers can put on notice, hey, this is what is happening with respect to a given transaction. So in your proposed legislation, you have a notice requirement. I suppose one question might be whether particular business, the question was, should the rounding itself be discretionary and mandatory? There's also a question of like, as to signage, should it be discretionary and mandatory? And if you adopt a rounding methodology, it might be that on one day I have pennies and I can pay out cash to the penny. On another day, I may be out of pennies and I can't get them, and so I have to round. And so there's some fluctuation there. And so what does the consumer know or anticipate? And do I have to have a sign on one day, but then not on the other day? So to your question about like mandatory or discretionary, should there just be a universal, should it be made clear that every retailer or every business that is engaged potentially in cash transactions or rounding just shall have a sign that says, what the policy is? You are the consumer. If we have change, we might be able to pay it out to you to the penny. If we don't, we may be rounding. And if we do, this is how we do it. That just might, if I was a consumer and I walked into one place and there was no sign, I might think, oh, they're not rounding. But then what happens if they have to round, or they now out of compliance and now am I complaining? Another business might have the signage, but on that day, maybe they have change in fact. And so they're not rounding, they're paying you out. Is it simpler to just have a template where everybody could use it and just say, hey, everybody, if you're operating commercially and you're doing cash transactions, there's just a universal signage and here's what it might be. That could be simpler for businesses too, just to say, hey, there's a form and we know what to put up by the register, and it's not left to us to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work. So there might be a benefit. Wanted to flag for the committee, maybe it's just in your signage provision that it's just like there's going to be one signage, everybody can use it, it's very simple. Here's what it is. And that would remove some question on consumers' parts about if I walk into one establishment and there's a sign and I walk into another one and there's not, what's happening here? So that's a question for you all to address, but I know sometimes when we get complaints, it's like, well, they didn't tell me, or there was no sign. So that could be the case here. I think if it's not entirely clear whether you're using the rounding mechanism or not, and whether you have to have.
Oh, so, I think having that universal sign is a good idea, because I'm channeling my grandfather who lived to 104, and he would have gone into a store with exact change, right? So there will be instances maybe where the store doesn't have change, but 103-year-old Louis Duke wants to pay with, 38 cents, not 40. So there's the paying. There's the giving change, but there's also the paying with exact change.
So I just thought I'd flag that for the committee. That's often one of the first stops or the questions or concerns we might get at the consumer assistance program is, hey, they didn't tell me, they didn't let me know. Or I looked up the law and it says there's supposed to be signage and there was no signage. And so now is that a violation? And then all those questions could be addressed by your committee or by the legislature if you just sort of said, hey, whether you have that capacity on a given day or not, that may be discretionary and up to you. But if there's a universal signage that just says that's how we're doing it, that kind of puts everybody on notice that there is a law, there's a notice provision, and everybody's using the same one. Just a thought I wanted to share with you all that could avoid some questions or concerns.
John,
I guess I confirm this. I think I heard you mean testimony that you haven't been receiving lots of calls about this.
I think if memory serves, we could do a search and sort of look, but if memory serves, I think my team has flagged this for me like on 2 occasions, and it might have even been one consumer and one retailer that sort of had the question. And so we've been letting folks know, really at this point, it's a question of fairness and letting the consumer know what you're doing. There is no law that governs how this is going to work right now. And it's still early. So this is going to develop over time as pennies become more scarce. So that we didn't, like I said, we didn't have a formal complaint where we were asked to like call somebody and get them back the 3 cents or a nickel or whatever they thought they might be entitled to, but or we haven't had, and I guess I should clarify, we haven't had calls or concerns saying, hey, I'm alleging systematic abuse that, for example, I got charged an extra nickel on every item I purchased or anything like that. Oh, and that was the one other thing I did want to offer to your committee. I know that Weights and Measures in the Agency of Agriculture does have an inspection team, and they're tasked with actually going out into retail environments to make sure, mostly about making sure that the weights and measures associated with certain products on store shelves are correctly priced. And so what you're paying when you check out is the same as what's offered on the shelf. So they're have some pretty good understanding and awareness and knowledge about how like the existing framework for costs and pricing works today. I don't know if they would have thoughts or suggestions or constructive ideas for you about this particular rounding question. But it could affect their work, I'm supposing.
Second part of my question was, do you recall the last time retail signage requirements that they were about? I'm guessing it was COVID stuff. I mean, what are the things that, when was the last time we made a mandatory sign in the store?
That is a great question. It also is a good question for Department of Sugar and Lottery, because there's a lot of signage that's mandatory around alcohol and tobacco. But as your question about COVID, I will have to check on that and get back to you. I'm not sure whether or if our office was tasked with offering any guidance on those questions, but it's a great question. So I will check and certainly look into it.
What I'm curious about are mandatory, are those requirements going to be determined in a piece of legislation, or are there subsequent determinants of how big, where it is? I think of when I'm at a checkout, how many signs am I seeing? And there's usually 5 or 6, some of which are about, the super hunks and the stars, magazines, others of which are about how old I am and what the day is today. Understand how information is absorbed and if there are standards within a state government or if that's done through legislation.
Great question, all great points. There's also, in consumer law, we just think about clear and conspicuous disclosures. So I have seen, for example, in practice already, there are some establishments that will just put on the door that you're walking in, like, here's our, like, pennies are scarce, we may not have them.
Yeah.
So they're kind of doing what they can without, the kind of more specific legislation that you're considering. So there might be a question about, like, is that sufficient that they just, in a big print, they disclose it on the front door as you're walking in? Others, maybe it's a smaller thing, you can buy the register. Those are all really important questions. It might go to, I can look back to see historically, where there've been other signage requirements and where they've been prescribed and where they haven't, in terms of like how the establishment presents it. But I think typically from a legal standpoint and consideration, we think about clear and conspicuous. And so that can come on a receipt. Sometimes that's clear and conspicuous. It can come in the form of a sign. It can come the storefront. It can come at the register. Some of those are maybe policy determinations that you all will make, informed by your constituents. But clear and conspicuous is generally the rule of thumb, and then how that is made clear and conspicuous might be something that you might want to consider, or not. And maybe you just say, here's the language, and then it can be determined by the establishment how they're actually made it clear and conspicuous. But I'll circle back on this because it can get sticky, the questions of signage. But it was just it's a question for you all to grapple with. These are not easy. They seem like, I looked at the bill, it's a short bill. And I know you deal with bills that are, scores of pages long. So it seems like a simple thing, and that, the devil's always in the details. And so it's not always as easy as it. So I appreciate the challenge of trying to help both businesses and consumers that you're trying to navigate. If there's anything else that our office can do or ways that we can assist, we're happy to do that and offer those thoughts. Or if you, as the legislation progresses, if you have questions, something comes up that you hadn't anticipated, where we are at your proposal, come and try to help as best we can.
I have a sort of a what if question, and I hate to do that, but I think I'm gonna do it anyway. If if somebody, if this legislation gets enacted and a business just uses it to prices in a way that only rounds up, right? So they price at the number that only round up. Is that the kind of thing that Consumer Protection Agency could get a complaint about down the road? Or is that like how is
Yeah.
that right? I don't want to incentivize something, but
It's a great question. So I suppose the answer is always it depends.
my what if it depends? Right? We're not-
So what I would suggest is if somebody is willfully ignoring the round up, round down
That's easy.
methodology that the legislature adopts, and they're only rounding up always in every circumstance to the detriment of consumers, I would say that is not the legislation has prescribed, and that falls outside of the exemption or safe harbor that you've created for the entities that properly disclose and are properly rounding up and rounding down. So I would say that may constitute a pattern and practice that is arguably or maybe clearly deceptive or unfair to consumers because they have deployed a device that is only doing it one way every time. So one might argue that that is by design, is willful, and it is actually attempting to evade the protections that you're trying to in this proposed legislation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
And so
there,
then-
there will be cases that are clear and there will be cases that are not so clear, maybe.
Yes, and
Yeah, I
the
think.
the flip side of that, I would just to offer the perspective is that it could be that somebody inadvertently or by mistake, and they might even have like a manual register, engage in a transaction once or twice the wrong way, and the consumer complains. And they're typically going to complain to Consumer Assistance Program at our office. We're going to call the retailer and find out like what happened here. And my guess is if it's inadvertent, if it's like a manual error, if it's like a mistake, and it's not a systemic, willful series of violations that are just essentially flouting the law, it's written 9 times out of 10. And in this instance, it's going to be like 99.9% of the time. The vendor, the business is going to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. We're happy to give them their nickel back. In fact, we'll give them a quarter, or we'll give them a gift certificate for $5 or whatever it is. Like very often there are what appear to be on the surface, like reports that we might receive of some kind of conflict. And when we contact the business, it's in the context of, we got this complaint, we want to hear your side of what happened. And the businesses very often, good actors in commerce are like, oh, I had no idea that person's so upset. If we made a mistake, we're happy to correct it. And that is not something that's a pattern or practice that represents like a major violation of the Consumer Protection Act. Like that would be something that's treated on a case-by-case basis. If we are getting scores of complaints about a particular actor and they are repeatedly doing the same thing over and over again, or it's discovered that there's somebody who's just continually only rounding up, that's a different set of facts and circumstances. So I can't say in every, it's like, yes, is there like a quote unquote violation of the statute? Have you sent it out? Yes, but if the business, I would also argue if the business cures it, then is there really a violation at all, right? Like, so.
Yeah, I mean,
The answer is it depends a little on the nature of the complaint and whether it's a series of complaints. Is it all about one actor who's engaged in the same kind of conduct that might be questionable? Or is it something that we get one call, it's one complaint, it's a really de minimis amount, and it's quickly and easily corrected, which is, I think, most businesses I know in Vermont want to do the right thing by their consumers. They're trying their best, and especially when the landscape changes and suddenly there's no pennies, be very unusual for somebody to really dig in and say, no, like they're wrong. Like, we are dug into this thing. And then the question is like, really, how would it be common for a consumer to pursue a matter that's that small or modest? Like, I don't know how much time or effort someone wants to put into making a contest of that. But we take every complaint as we receive them. We try to work these things out on a case by case basis. If we see a pattern or practice that's larger and involves a particular actor, that might be something that's ripe for investigation and enforcement. And this law does not, provide a universal safe harbor or inoculate bad actors from potential investigation or enforcement if they're abusing around the system that you all pass and effectuate.
Yeah, I mean, our goal is very clearly to make it a known system for businesses to work in the state of Vermont, right? We want our businesses to be successful. We want them to have a clear path. We want all of that. And my question is, are we creating a perverse incentive? And I don't think we are, but I just wanted to kind of put it out there as are we?
I think there was a report that we saw from Canada that there were some retailers that would price their items so that they ended in 8 or 9 or 3 or 4. That way
Round up.
they are always rounding up. But that's still within the law, right? Because I mean, are we gonna price fit until retailers how they?
Right. And the market has to.
Right.
And I think as long as we're clear, it's the final price, it's not each item.
Right.
They don't round each item, it's just rounding the final price.
If you have something that's $1.44, if you buy 3 of them, it's getting rounded down.
Yeah.
So I think it would be much easy
Yeah.
for the AG to figure this out, because you would have to put policies in that say limit 2 per purchase or something like that for you to really take advantage of this.
Not if you buy 3.
You know, if you go by 3.
Well, I think that the chairman has put a finger on something that, could be potentially important, which is before a party gets to the register, could it be the case that somebody adjusts their pricing to essentially dictate that when you do get to the register, it's always a roundup, right? So it's not really the rounding question, because they're implementing the rounding as articulated. It's that there's an adjustment through software or maybe artificial intelligence or by other means to say when we're dealing in mass quantities, we can make it so that the pricing ensures, they probably have to figure out about the tax too, right? But that somehow it's always coming out so that the house always wins, right? It's always going to be rounded up. That would require a great deal of sophistication. That obviously would be a willful regime. I do think, when you look at the applicability section, again, this is just a question for you all. The question would be, so the application section, subsection D of the bill says, notwithstanding any law to the contrary, rounding under this section shall not constitute an unlawful price increase or charge for the nation. So that's as to the rounding. As to the price fixing, that would all still be subject to investigation, antitrust principles, consumer protection, unfairness, and so on. But the key question might be, how does one know? Does the average consumer know? If it's invisible because it's done on the pricing ad, at the register, you're saying, oh yeah, they're just rounding the way that the law says they're supposed to round. It's hard to know or to see necessarily that there's been some adjustment on the price point. Again, this might get into sort of weights and measures question, but on the price points, is it always leaning towards or moving you towards rounding up when you finally get to the register? Again, these are small, assuming it's all aggregate pricing, these are small individual transactions for the most part. I suppose one question I haven't fully thought through is, like, does this get into like commercial actors, larger shipments, multiple thousands of shipments of goods and prices, and then how does that all play out to you get into wholesalers and retailers, and are the retailers somehow paying? Those are questions that are maybe outside the scope of the bill, because this is really about what's the consumer paying. But I could imagine circumstances, and the question for you all might be in the applicability section, do you preserve and say, if there's a willful pattern and practice of deceit or being, you put people on notice to say, don't be doing the back end chicanery that's going to always result in one way, because if you do, we're putting you on notice, like that is still subject to enforcement activity. So you could modify or just gently tweak that applicability provision just to hold out. That would be, that's not the local Vermont business, but could there be an entity, and also in fairness to you all, like we don't know what we don't know. So this penny problem, this penny issue is going to play out over time in different ways. And there's sort of like this initial shortage or scarcity here and there. And then long term, eventually the pennies are going to disappear from circulation altogether. And then you're going to have questions around price points and so on. So it's a little hard to anticipate in totality where it's going. I think your committee and this body generally is grappling with the right questions, which is like clear and conspicuous notice. How do we go about that? And then what are the rounding principles, which is going to generally deal with most of the questions most of the time. If there was a bad actor out there, somebody seeking to take advantage, some sort of larger player, and they're sort of doing this sort of price manipulation, I think antitrust principles and consumer protection are still going to apply anyway. But the question of how you find out or how you get noticed, or do you have a basis for investigation, might come from consumers. And so if you wanted to introduce another aspect or really make that explicit in your applicability provision of subsection D, you could include some language that gets at that question to say, you might be rounding the right way every single time, but you're not inoculated if there's some kind of willful activity that is resulting in price manipulation. And then at least, you know, the businesses who, or the bad actor can't say, well, nobody ever told us. We just relied on the shield. We were doing the rounding, right? Good questions, really good questions.
I mean, I would have to say, because you have to provide prices. So if you're somehow trying to finesse that, that would be, you're charging something that is not what the written price is, and I'm assuming that's illegal.
It happens all the time.
It might happen all the time, but I'm pretty sure that it's not something that is allowed, because that would be that would definitely fall into like false advertising. So I don't know if that would be too much of an issue.
Well, to your point, that's a great one, because that is what Weights and Measure does. Like they'll go out and they do price scanning, like on the, so what's the unit price, what's the per pound price, and then they look at that and then they say, well, and then if we go swipe at the checkout, like, does that all match up, right? So they do that. There's a regulatory regime, and you're quite correct. That would be unlawful, and there are corrections that get issued, or sometimes we'll get cited or what have you.
But if somebody, let's say I'm a convenience store in Coventry, and I know that every single time I get, you know, daily, I get somebody that comes in, buys one candy bar, and I know that it will round to $1.02. And if I just change my price point by 1 cent, it'll go to 3. But it's written down. I'm not saying that you would ever do that.
It's not where stories.
Oh.
I can't sell a chocolate bar for $1 or $2.
But
you can take it a loss.
The point that the price fixing on that, I mean, it's not, you can't price fix without coming afoul
I mean, you can set your price
right, but I can set my price.
so long as it's available to the public. And
Right.
Your
And
price is the same for you, and for you, and for you, and for you.
correct, and if it's
So you can set a price so that it will round out.
right, but I mean, it is icky, but I don't think it's false. I wouldn't say that it's. I mean,
Their job.
yeah, I would. I mean, that would be,
This
it would
is
be,
the point that you're trying to grapple with. I think exactly this, which is what the chair's question was, if it ends up being that the prices were adjusted to always round up, then the question might be, I do see that price fixing or price adjustments to result in a certain rounding process is different than adopting the rounding process itself. So somebody could be compliant with the rounding process, but on the back end, doing modest changes to their disclosed pricing that results in always pricing upward.
right,
I believe under existing either antitrust or consumer protection principles, if we were made aware of that and we could see that that was a pattern of practice and it was always resulting in that way, that still would be a basis for investigation enforcement, even today. On the other hand, if you want to be explicit about that in your bill to put people on notice and say like, yes, this does not absolve you if it's always resulting in that. Like we know that is maybe it's an abstract potentiality, but just in case, we're letting the whole community know, like, don't be doing that because this is not a safe harbor for that. You can't pull in your pricing with your rounding and come up with something that's always detrimental to the consumer. So that would be a consideration, but like you said, I think even if you didn't adjust that applicability section, to me, if somebody was willfully manipulating pricing to always do that, there would be a question about whether that is a violation. And I think there would be a basis for looking into that.
There's a lot of what ifs. And I think, we put a system in and then we find out, and I think that's what the EDD's office is there for.
We could write into bill this, reference consumer protection laws, right? I mean, this way people are aware. We've done that with a couple other bills in the past. It doesn't affect anything. It's just there as just so you know.
Cameron's behind you when we talk to them. We can.
I would just, it's been a while since I've been in that area of the law, but there's, it's not really clear cut. So if you just reference a body of law, and I'm sure Chris would agree, there are some pretty clear cut cases. There's some cases that might look kind of funny at the outset, but then when you get into it, it's really, there are defenses to those kinds of things from this as well.
Yes.
So I think we need to be careful about just saying, referencing a body of law and think, well, this will clarify things.
And I think for your purposes today, I just, it came up, so I can mention it. And the truth is, though, there is a difference between rounding at time of purchase for a purpose of providing change and pricing, deceptive pricing. So I do believe that those are distinct. And so even if the legislation doesn't speak to that issue specifically, I think if we had cause to view there was something going on that was price fixing that resulted in a rounding thing, this legislation does not mean that that business is absolved from bad acts that result from pricing. So I think that's true. It might be a question of interpretation, and a business might have, they might have defenses that they want to raise. And so that would be a question that could be either looked into, investigated. Maybe there's nothing there, maybe there is. It could be litigated, it could be settled. So there's all kinds of ways that those things end up getting resolved.
I'm just saying that I'm sort of comfortable, with the applicability section as it is. Once we start getting into the weeds of, what sort of pricing is anti-competitive or unfair or whatever, you might have a longer than 4-page bill.
That, and is it unfair if I price my product instead of 95 to 99?
I don't know it's been a while, so I don't know the analysis.
It just, if we're concerned about it, referencing it, but I agree with you, Herbert. I think it's fine. Like you said, it's already in current statute, so.
I guess you had, I don't know if Maggie provided it. I saw the report that was done on the Canadian system. Maybe we should take a look at that and just read the report that came from the Canadian system. They've been in well over 10 years now. So look at that. And there were some stores that raised their price to 99 so that things rang up. They weren't getting an extra 2 or 3 cents. And how much money did that amount to at the end of the year? Not a lot of money. So I think it's all de minimis, and I think what we want to do is provide a clear expectation for businesses to rely on of how they deal with rounding up and rounding down.
And just to reiterate, you would need to adjust that price on a per transaction basis. Because if I'm buying something that ends in a 4 and I buy 3 of them, you're rounding down now.
Yeah, but if you're sending things up at 99, you're still keeping up there. So I mean, if we were talking dollars. We're talking pennies. So
Well, we're talking pennies now.
we're gonna get rid of money altogether.
No.
And then we have to remember, this is only cash transactions. It doesn't affect if you're paying with a check. It doesn't affect if you're paying with a credit card. The pennies are still involved here.
Thank you so
Chris,
much for
thank
your
you.
time today. If you have other questions or other things pop up along the way, feel free to call on us and we're happy to come back.
Yeah, appreciate the thought of weights and measures too.
Should we get
Aaron. Here comes in.
Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
Aaron Ferris, Deputy Commissioner of Banking at DFR. Here's my 2 cents against legislation. If no one's used that already.
Oh, don't worry.
No, we heard it multiple times.
Stick around down, there's nothing because then. We're generally in support of this bill. This actually basically mirrors some informal guidance that we were preparing to try and issue in this space. I just had one comment that's really related to Abby, Representative Duke's grandfather. On page 3, it says, under paragraph E, optional, this section shall not prohibit a consumer from tendering exact cash unless the person or business has provided notice of their rounding. I think you should be able to provide exact cash if you want.
Yeah.
That's really.
Yeah. Well, that way you can get some, might be able to get some more pennies.
Hey, precisely.
Okay. Question for Aaron?
Signs. Kind of noticed you give to businesses around signage today. Could you have a sign on your website that a business could download so that they know exactly what to post? How did that work with your office?
Yeah, within the banking division, we don't have any requirements like that. We just require that you put the notice in some instances that your deposits are insured, so it's not really. Doesn't go that deep for us. I wouldn't say we have any requirements there.
We did years ago when we allowed stores to require a certain amount to use a credit or debit card. So I think it was up to $10. There was a requirement that they had to post that at the register, so
Yeah,
customers knew that, you know, in order to use a debit card, it went up from $0 to $10. So,
But it's not DFR.
But I don't think that we created a sign. It was just the requirement to post a sign.
yeah. I don't think it's DFR. I think that's really just general commerce, not really financial
Yeah.
institutions.
Yeah.
I know a couple of years ago, we required a sign in gun shops to share information about appropriate storage.
Okay.
But I think it was, I don't know that anybody owns it, right? I don't know who owns the sign. I know it's in law, so
And like I said,
houses maybe is better.
yeah, like I said, the draft guidance that we were preparing to try and issue, which really didn't have any legal teeth behind it, was gonna say, as long as you disclose this, so. It seemed
Yeah.
reasonable.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for you? Great. Thanks, Aaron. All this time for just giving us
I
your
just
2
wanted
cents.
to do my
worth.
job.
Leading a sentence is helpful.
Sean, did you have a thought?
I believe I was just looking to see if I could confirm it, but I'm pretty sure that I read that pennies are being circulated until 2028. And then they're out of circulation. So just to the point here, just want to make sure that after they're out of circulation, we don't want to be, we want it to be mandatory, we still take those. So if we get into that too much, I just want to make sure that it's a thought there.
Well,
Still be able to deposit that.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think you can still bring them to the bank or you can still use them with customers. I mean, it's still legal tender, so I think if you're as a business, if you have a customer giving you pennies, you can still give them out. Well, even if Federal Reserve's not circulating them any.
They will still take them at the bank. The banks will until
You bring money to a bank and I guarantee you they're gonna take it. Um. Cameron, is there anything you need from us? Or direction? I guess the question is the language written now so that it's optional to round or not round. But if you're going to round, then this is how you're going to do it.
Yes, sir. For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. I appreciate the testimony from the General's office. I think they kind of validated a lot of the, assumptions that we all had and discussed when we first walked through the bill. So they're the enforcement mechanism as long as they're reading it that way. And I think that that's a kind of plain language reading of it and they're comfortable. I'm not sure that you need to make any adjustments there. I agree with them. The statutory framework is you may do this. And so if they found that some employer or entity was doing something willful to circumvent what is authorized in statute, I do agree that they could then investigate that from some sort of unfair, deceptive, practice. I agree with their comments too about the pricing. I thought it was a great point that was brought up. I mean, if you try to manipulate price to have something in a transaction that's going to allow you to round up, that doesn't account for then somebody who's buying a second or third item. And you're going to get to a point where it could then ultimately round down. It would take a very sophisticated system to be able to ensure that in every instance, it resulted in a roundup. And I would say at that point, as the AG's office mentioned, it's not really a rounding issue at that point. That's more of a price gouging deceptive act that the entity is doing, and full confidence the AG would then approach it from that perspective. So I think what you have works in that regard. I acknowledge what the AG said about the signage. It may be worth it to have some discussion about having a standard sign. I can agree with the AG there. You could end up with different versions and people may become confused. I was going to comment that it was such a good recommendation. Maybe the AG's office wanted to do that. I think that could be problematic because they're the ones who are then enforcing, against said, unfair and deceptive, clear and conspicuous messaging, et cetera. So it may not be a good thing to have them do it and then turn around and be the one enforcing against the signage that they've created potentially. But I think that is potentially a good recommendation. As far as the last piece, or one of the last pieces that was mentioned about individuals paying in exact cash, it's a policy decision for you, but I think that could also become problematic. I mean, you're saying to a business, hey, we recognize there could be a shortage of pennies. And so if you're essentially trying to get out of the penny business, we're going to let you round and you can round to nickels. And then to turn around and say, but if somebody's going to pay you a nickel, you got to take them and you can't round in that instance. You're kind of creating an exception, that may just then become difficult for that entity to kind of administer and go through. So there's that exclusion, it says that it doesn't prohibit somebody paying an exact change unless the business has demonstrated, provided notice that they're going to round. And I would potentially keep it that way. If the business wants to round and you're saying this is how you can round and we're blessing you to do so, somebody comes in and says, but I want to pay an exact change. I think it would potentially become problematic to force the business to accept that. It's a policy decision for you. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying it was something that came into my mind as I was sitting there thinking about it. So as of right now, I'm not aware of any changes that you directly asked for in regards to the bill, but happy to start to pencil things out as you deem if you want to amend.
Lots of questions. Go ahead. Somebody else.
Yeah, I appreciate what your thoughts on that, Cameron. I'm not as convinced that allowing an individual customer to tender cash would be huge. I mean, maybe you hear from businesses, but it doesn't. in fact, I'd like to hear from businesses whether that would be an imposition, because I would think that they, right now, they, I think like the chair said, that you can just bring it in the bank, they'll give you something in return for all those pennies. I don't know. And as to the notice, geez, I thought the AG had, they do a lot of things, I think, by rules and regulations when they're trying to give guidance about how to enforce or, anything about the administration of a statute. I don't know that they actually do notices, but it wouldn't
Yeah.
strike me as
I think
untoward.
clear and conspicuous is probably enough for them. But
That would be fine with me too. I'm just saying that, it doesn't concern me all that much if the AG.
we can have Chris come back.
Yeah,
They did. Get very specific, for example, the crypto kiosks.
That was DFR.
Oh, that's too far. Oh, you're right, it was an AG.
Yep. Crypto kiosks, that was you.
a regular,
It is with us. I was having flashbacks.
Oh. I'm sorry,
Is this germane to crypto?
sorry.
I was just thinking the disclosures, you all
Yes.
were very specific
Yes.
about how they looked, how they read, where they're.
Very specific.
In a financial transaction.
Yeah.
Not in a commercial transaction. Yeah. Tony, did you have a question?
I'm good.
If you remember the last time we took this, Mr. Weiss, who you had discussed with us, so. I think it's on page 3. Section E2. Require person or business to accept cash and person or business is supposed to clear policy stating that the person or business does not accept cash. I think we have a bill.
Yes, we do.
And on the
Page 24.
that talks about. And I don't know that we want to get into that realm, and maybe we take that subsection out.
Up to you. I mean, it's there just, intending to provide notice that if the business is not taking cash, then obviously, the section's not going to apply to that business. I know that gets into a big puddle as you referenced in the bill that you have, and positions on whether businesses should be required to accept cash or not. So I don't know that it's necessary to have it in, could be helpful, but up to the code. And understood, it may just invite frustration or confusion. So.
Yeah.
I feel like we'd be opening a can of worms.
I'm ready are you ready to move on to the next?
Mhm.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, just,
I think
that's-
that's right. I agree.
I mean, it's. No, we're missing a few members, but that's something you all agree with.
Removing that subdivision, yeah, okay.
I would also like to understand if we take the sentence above that out, where we're not prohibiting a customer from tendering cash. I feel like if they accept cash, we should allow people to pay with cash and exact change and not, and so come up with a way to say, if you can't, if you have no way to ensure that you have appropriate change, right? Then it, on a ongoing basis, right? Is that appropriate language? And is that, I don't want to cause confusion, but I also want to make sure that customers can still pay for their things. And so so I'm wondering if you can explore that a little bit.
I want to think about it a little more.
Yeah.
I will say this, I mean, the going down that road, you're potentially adding on additional layer of conditions and confusion to businesses. If you tell them, the bill right now is very straightforward. If you as a business choose to round your transactions, understanding that there's a shortage of pennies, and that will probably just exacerbate as we move out. and you want to round your transactions, we're telling you that you can do so. And then if you start adding in conditions that say, except if the person has the exact change. And now you do run into an issue where it's, you happen to come in with a few pennies in your pocket, you're gonna pay this price. If you don't have a few pennies in your pocket, hope you have some nickels, because it's gonna be rounded. And then if you then add on additional, layers of saying, if the business is not in a position where they can be, provide exact change, then you can round as, I would worry about continuing to go down that type of road, because I think the AG's office would then subsequently come in and say, you're making it a lot more squishy if we're trying to go after somebody who is a bad actor. And for the business community, I think you're making it a lot more possible confusion about when do we round, when do we not round.
They shouldn't have to use an if-then flow chart to be able to do business every transaction.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
not necessary.
Exactly. And that's, I think, a great point of what I was simply trying to make is exactly that, is you start from the premise of the bill, which is if you want to round, you can round, and here's what you can do. And then if you turn around and add in again a situation where somebody has the exact change, now you're creating if-then circumstances. And so somebody pays me with a few pennies. Now I have a few pennies. So does the next customer who pays in cash, do I have to give those pennies back, or because I have them now? Or can I take them out of the drawer and put them over here and continue back to rounding? And I'm mentioning to you, I think it potentially invites more confusion
What if you
versus
owe,
just saying it's rounded.
what if you owe 4 cents and you only have 3 pennies?
And just before I cede the floor, the pennies will stay in circulation for a long time. So that's not whatever, yeah. So we don't have to, I looked at the Treasury website or. Yeah. We're seeing the-
Canada's been without pennies for how long? 2000.
2011 or 20?
Yeah, they're still in circulation down here. So. So you're correct. They'll still be in circulation for a while.
Small down.
Yeah, I know, it's irritating. But that being said, regarding whether or not they bring exact cash in. Except for like the really old timey stores that have, ding, ching, ching for cash registers. Most stores now have POS systems, and you're talking like massive amount of coding for 2 cents or a cent in some cases. And I think that adding that, I know, but if it's the old timey store, it's okay. But most stores, if not all of them now, have a POS system.
I don't.
And, oh, you don't? You have an old timey store? Good for
Pretty
you.
great. You need to take a drive.
Well, you know what? You can choose to opt out.
A crank on it.
No, but do you really have an old system like that?
I got a regular electronic cash register.
No. Well,
Doesn't have to scan around. I run all my prices down.
you have to do the for the credit card.
They do make side by jeans credit cards. Do you? Come up, I'll teach you.
I might
math.
pick them up. But I'm just saying that, I think we should not have that part in there. Either you do it or you don't.
yeah.
And I know, because legitimately,
Oh,
like,
dogs and new tricks. My God, what am I gonna do? I can,
But if you, doesn't matter if you have a POS system or not, when you tender your cash, and if it's $20.01, and I give you $20.01, you're gonna punch that into the register. It's gonna say, I don't owe you anything.
but if the register is set up to automatically round, unless the register is coded, or the POS system is coded to say, if the customer gives me exact change, I can do this. which then you're relying on like Clover or whatever app is out there, or whatever POS system is out there. Because you're not, it's gonna be all internal and super quick. And then it's gonna mess up when you click at the end of the day and you click print, you're gonna have to monitor what you're putting in.
I think we had testimony on today. That some systems can do it easily and some can't.
Yeah, right, but what I'm saying though is if
you have a POS system,
You
it's
tell it
gonna
it's
round down or
cash,
it's gonna round.
but then that's another step that you tell it it's cash or you tell it it's a check.
so I can only speak for the
Same way
Clover
Charge
that I've
extra for
used.
credit cards.
Right, but the current, for Clover, I know that when you get two options, you can pay via cash or you can pay via credit. You get in the place that I've used Clover, you get a discount for using cash. In order to do the rounding with you can do cash, you have to rely on Clover to code for that. They are coding based on Treasury. My guess is they will be coding based on Treasury guidance. And Treasury guidance does not talk about, well, you can pay with cash and you have to modify your system. And if you're saying that, well, the cash says, 501, but it rounds down automatically. And you see that it's 501, but I want to give you 501 or not 501, 504 versus 505. If you're asking a person on the register to do that, they're going to have to manually track that information unless the cash register is automatically doing that for you. And I can almost guarantee you they're not. Am I not making any sense?
You are, I just don't think we agree with.
Counter to that.
Oh, okay.
If you will. I believe that the way that it works is, the transaction comes out to 2001. You still have to type in the amount, because other transactions in the system are, the credit cards or whatever. Before you tell it what payment method you're gonna use, you still have to type in. If you're using a credit card, you hit credit and you charge 2001. But if you're using cash, you type into the register 2001, it's still gonna accept that as an amount that you told it that it gave you as a payment. And so the rounding doesn't come out, the changes after that. And so if you told it it gives you, a different amount or whatever, then it tells you what the change is after you type in the tender that you told it you received. You follow me
So
there?
what would it do if you're rounding and it comes out to 2001, you punch in 20?
Well, it's,
Because that's what you're gonna get, right? If you're rounding down,
yeah, well.
then will the POS system round it down?
Good question. I don't know, because in my system, that's how it's around yet, but,
Yeah.
but I'm just,
I'm just getting.
yeah,
So that's an internal thing that
yeah.
I don't think it's gonna do any harm for somebody giving you the right change on a cash transaction.
Agreed.
Um,
I think it's gonna still let you put in 2004. Somebody, that's what somebody gives you. Your register's still gonna let you put in the exact amount that they give you. And there's no rounding involved because there's no change involved at all.
Right.
You're not giving change back there.
Right.
They gave you exactly what you needed.
Right.
So, I believe.
Yeah, my suspicion, and maybe the answer is that we get somebody that has one of those, or, that part of the, a Clover
Tell you
industry.
what, I'm going to Canada Sunday. My in-laws, and we're going to the store. And so when we go to the store, I'll see
Pay with cash.
I'll see what it does and pay with cash.
Can
See
you,
what it does.
say that on live? There's some chocolates up there I would love to have.
Hopefully exchange rate's good.
It's not about the exchange rate. It's the $12,000 fine if you get caught with them.
I will not be doing that.
Will not be doing that. Kinder eggs, they're amazing.
Can I, see if I can understand? Are we talking about whether to include that unless phrase in E
I
one?
think E1, yeah.
To, whether to delete that unless phrase? I don't see any reason why we shouldn't delete it. I prefer to delete that first. But I don't have real strong feelings about it, other than I'm a cash guy. But
I think you could just, the example that I'm thinking in my head is somebody comes to the writ. Here's my assumption that I not need to hear from others, right? You have an electronic system, you then program the system around on your behalf, so you don't have errors at the point of sale from the cashier themselves trying to know which way around and get it wrong. So you scan the item and then I turn to you and you will be 20 done, but that customer doesn't know that. System is gonna automatically round it, and you're just gonna tell the customer $20. And let's assume that you do tell the customer that, though, it's 2001, unless you don't have pennies, in which case it's 20. I'm the customer, I'm always been, I'm gonna get pennies, what are you talking about? I'm gonna get a few pennies back, right? The opposite case, and you say it's 2004. Unless you don't have pennies, in which case it's 2005. And I imagine you could get that could cause some sort of confusion or frustration on the customer's behalf. If you're saying that, you have to accept exact change if it's all. Again, policy decision for you, or I'm just thinking potentially.
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, I think it's saying the site shall not prohibit a customer from tendering exact change. Unless the business has provided notice that they're rounding.
That's how it reads now. I agree. And I'm saying if you're striking that unless piece,
Oh.
if you're striking the unless and you're giving the customer to say, you shall accept it if the customer is giving you exact change, that's the concern that I was raising.
But at that point, is it, so what if there's a constant penny anyway? Even if they're rounding, is this saying that you can't do that?
Well, it doesn't require the business to round, so.
Yeah, but if they are round, I mean, it says if you are rounding.
And so that's where I think that's.
And I guess that's still between the customer and the retail.
Right. And that's where I think as the business, allowing them that certainty to say, you can round and you can always round and here's how you're gonna do it.
Yeah.
Because I think if a business were to decide, in this instance, I'm gonna take the exact change because you're offering it, but in another instance, I'm not. And then I might round in another instance. My advice to the business would be you're opening yourself up to a lot of questions. About, potential customer complaints. Well, you rounded for them, or, are you doing it in every instance or not? And to me, if I were advising the business, I would say you're potentially opening yourself up to a consumer complaint and then potentially a call from the AG's office to figure out what you're doing and is it in compliance with the section? And so.
Dump it.
Well, but again, I also don't imagine these circumstances coming up very frequently. But.
We're really overthinking.
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, there's that. I'll drop it. I don't see the rounding there, but anyway.
Okay. So I told you I'd get you out of here at noon.
Good job.
Central time.
Says the man that's been running us down these rabbit holes.
So I do know at least striking the one subdivision that we talked about, and then just.
We have to think about requirement for, I think we should be writing what it is. I'd like it to live somewhere so that a business can get on the website and just click on a PDF and print it out. You can put it on, either put it in the window, if it's your door window, or put it on your cash register. This is how we make it as simple as possible. maybe we can have a discussion with Department of Labor because they print out, they have a whole whole list of
Required
required
notices.
notices that exactly that businesses have that required.
And if you also, as was mentioned, and if you have, did you say that again regarding weights and measures that I don't know to what extent they're having to provide notices,
Yeah, we'll see. They may have it, but it might be more of a right place for that, especially for businesses that are skiing. Okay. Any more folks we want to go down? We'll be ready to roll.
Ready to roll.
All right. Thank,
A wonderful weekend.
thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Aaron. John, thank you for coming over. Appreciate it. We'll, I think what would. Think about what we're gonna do with this one. We're gonna put it in the economic development bill, we just, then we can't.
We have to pass it on the top.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it for this week. We have an agenda set up. We're gonna go over it with Jonathan. Just check the webpage over the weekend. And if you had a chance, we have that report, the Canadian report. Was that, you ever get that? No, can't remember where I saw it. But
Yes, too, but it's not on our, posted on our page anymore. Maybe it's an email.
maybe Maggie knows. Can see if we can get it anyway, so everybody can see it. Okay, thanks again. With that, everyone have a good Easter. Get charged up again. See you Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock.